You spent 20 years believing your father died broke and ashamed somewhere on the other side of the country, a man too proud to call and too broken to be found. You build an empire on that grief, climbing every rung of a company that once fired him, and you never once imagine that the quiet janitor who empties your office trash can every night at 8 p.m., the one you've nodded to 1,000 times without truly seeing, has been standing 3 feet from you the entire time. You are Barnaby Winthrop. You are 44 years old, CEO of Holloway Industrial Systems, a manufacturing and logistics company headquartered in a glass tower in Columbus, Ohio, built from the wreckage of the very factory floor your father, Roscoe Winthrop, once worked on as a machinist before he was let go 20 years ago in a round of layoffs he never fully recovered from. You live alone in a downtown penthouse, divorced 6 years now, your only daughter, Verity, splitting her time between your place and her mother's, and you run your company with the discipline that colleagues privately call cold and you privately call survival. Because the alternative, softness, the kind that leaves you vulnerable, is a luxury you decided 20 years ago you couldn't afford. 20 years ago, your father was a floor machinist at the same company you now run, back when it was a mid-sized manufacturing outfit called Delacour Steelworks, before a leveraged buyout and 2 name changes turned it into the corporation, whose name is etched in brushed steel above your office door. When the buyout happened, 300 factory workers were let go in a single fiscal quarter, your father among them. A man in his late 40s with a machinist's hands and no other trade, discarded in a spreadsheet, decision made by executives who never once walked the factory floor themselves. He tried finding work for 8 months. He came home smaller each week, quieter, until one gray February morning he simply wasn't there anymore. No note, no goodbye, just an empty coat hook by the door and a mother. Your mother, Loretta, who told you gently that some men carry shame so heavy it eventually crushes even their ability to stay. You were 24. You'd just graduated with a business degree you'd financed on loans your father co-signed before he lost his job. And you spent the following 2 decades building a version of yourself that could never be discarded the way he was, climbing through finance, then operations, then acquisitions, until 15 years later, through a strange twist of corporate fate, you found yourself named CEO of the very company that had let your father go, a fact you've never once mentioned publicly, because the story felt too raw, too much like admitting a wound that never closed. You built your life on the belief that your father died somewhere unknown, in some unmarked corner of the country, too ashamed to reach out even at the end. Your mother passed 8 years ago still believing the same thing, still keeping his old work boots in a closet she never opened, and you inherited that grief along with the company itself. A strange, private mourning that you buried under 80-hour work weeks and a management style so exacting that your assistant, a sharp, endlessly patient woman named Odette, has learned to schedule your calendar in 15-minute increments just to survive your standards. Your daughter Verity is 16 now, and she asks you sometimes about the grandfather she never met, and you've learned to answer honestly in the sparse facts you actually have. He lost his job, he left, he never came back. You don't know where he went or whether he's even alive. It isn't cruelty. It's the truth as far as you know it. And you decided a long time ago that grief deserves truth even when the truth is an unfinished sentence. Every night without fail, you're the last executive to leave the Holloway Industrial Systems building, working past 9, sometimes past 10, in an office on the 32nd floor with a view of the same factory grounds where your father once worked, machine presses that don't exist anymore, replaced by automated lines that require a fraction of the labor and none of the men who used to run them. It's a small ritual staying that late, though you've never examined too closely why you do it. Maybe because an empty office asks nothing of you, and after your divorce, that particular silence became easier than the silence of an empty apartment. The building's night janitor, a quiet, stooped man in his late 60s named Fenwick. Everyone just calls him Fenwick. First name unclear. Listed simply as F. Winthrop. On the janitorial roster you've never once looked at closely. Empties your office trash can every evening around 8. Always nodding once. Never speaking beyond a soft evening. Sir? Always gone again before you look up from your monitor long enough to actually see him. You've worked in this building for 6 years since becoming CEO. In all that time, you've exchanged perhaps 40 words with him total. The particular blindness of a man, too, consumed by his own grief to notice the quiet dignity of someone else's. About 6 months ago, you started noticing small things, not about Fenwick specifically, but about the building itself. Your office trash, always emptied with an unusual, almost obsessive care, corners of your desk dusted that you never asked anyone to dust. A chipped mug you'd meant to throw away instead washed and returned to your shelf. Odette mentions once in passing that the night janitor has requested this specific floor, this specific office every single night for 6 months, turning down an easier rotation on lower floors that would cut his walking distance in half. You think nothing of it at the time. Old men, you assume, develop odd routines. You have bigger things occupying your mind, and a hostile acquisition threat from a rival firm, a strained relationship with Verity's mother over custody schedules, the particular loneliness of turning 44 in an empty penthouse with a daughter who's begun preferring her mother's house on weekends. But the mystery gnaws at you in the way things do when you work alone in a glass tower until 10 p.m. most nights, with too much silence and too much time to notice small inconsistencies you'd otherwise dismiss. You start watching Fenwick more carefully, and the particular way he hums under his breath while working. A low wandering tune, 3 notes repeated, unplaceable but naggingly familiar. The way he lingers sometimes at the framed photograph on your credenza, you and your late mother at your college graduation. A half-second longer than a man simply emptying trash would ever need to. One rain-soaked Thursday in late October. You're working past 11, later than usual. The hostile acquisition threat keeping. You awake with spreadsheets and legal memos. When Fenwick enters your office for his nightly round, later than his usual 8 p.m. because the building's east wing flooded and every janitor on staff has been rerouted to help with cleanup. He looks exhausted in a way that catches your attention. Older than 60-something. Should look. A slight tremor in his hands as he empties your trash can. A machinist's hands, you notice suddenly. Thick-knuckled and precise despite the tremor. Hands that know how to hold a tool the way a career, not a job, teaches a body to hold something. Long night for both of us, you say. More out of exhausted courtesy than genuine curiosity. Barely looking up from your monitor. Some nights are longer than others, Fenwick says. And something in his voice, a specific gravel, a specific cadence, makes you look up fully. For the first time in 6 years of near-invisible interactions, he's standing in the lamplight from your desk. And for one suspended, impossible second, the 20 years between the last time you saw your father and this exact moment collapse entirely, and you are looking at a face aged and weathered beyond recognition at first glance, except for the eyes, which haven't changed at all, which are exactly, unmistakably the eyes that used to watch you do homework at the kitchen table before everything fell apart. Say something else, you tell him, and your voice comes out strange, unrecognizable even to yourself. Say something else right now. Fenwick goes very still, trash bag half lifted, and you watch a lifetime of careful invisibility begin to crack across a face that's spent 6 months apparently, standing 3 feet from you in careful silence. Barnaby, he says, and it's your father's voice, unmistakably, the voice you buried along with the rest of him 20 years ago. I've been waiting for you to look up properly for 6 months. I didn't think I had the right to make you do it sooner. You're supposed to be dead, you say, and it comes out flat, disbelieving, the words of a man whose grief has just been declared a clerical error. Mom died still believing you were gone somewhere we'd never find. I built an entire life on the idea that you were too ashamed to ever come back. I was, he says, and he sets the trash bag down slowly, hands trembling now for reasons that have nothing to do with age. I was too ashamed, Barnaby. For years, I lost my job at this company. The same job, the same building, though it wore a different name back then. And I couldn't look at your mother, couldn't look at you, knowing I'd co-signed loans for your future while losing the ability to provide anything at all. I told myself disappearing was a mercy, that you'd both build better lives without a broken man dragging you down. I moved 3 states over, took work with my hands wherever nobody asked too many questions, and every year the shame got heavier instead of lighter, until I didn't know how to come back without shattering whatever you'd both managed to rebuild without me. So instead, you took a janitor's job at the company that fired you, you say, voice shaking, cleaning up after the son who runs it. Close enough to watch, but too much of a coward to say a single word. I found out you'd become CEO here 2 years ago, he admits, and the confession comes apart in pieces, jagged and unrehearsed. I saw your name in an industry newsletter, and something in me needed to be near you, even from a distance, even doing work you'd probably never notice a man doing. I took this job 8 months ago. I requested this floor 6 months ago once I worked up the nerve. I've dusted your desk, washed your mug, listened to you on calls through the door some nights, just to feel like I was still, in some small useless way, part of your life. You don't get to watch me from the shadows and call it love, you say, and you're standing now. Years of buried grief finding a target at last. Love doesn't hide in a janitor's uniform for 6 months. Love doesn't let a mother die still, believing her husband abandoned her without explanation. I know, Fenwick says, and he's crying now, an old man's tears, unguarded for the first time in 20 years. I know exactly what I let happen, Barnaby. I've known it every single night. I've stood in this office pretending to be invisible. I just didn't know how to undo it. So I let the silence do what I was too much of a coward to undo myself. You stand in that office for a long moment. 20 years of grief and 6 months of unknowing proximity colliding into something you don't yet have a word for. You don't forgive him, not in that instant. Forgiveness, you're learning in real time, isn't a door that swings open all at once. It's a long hallway, and you've only just found yourself standing at its entrance, staring down its length. Verity doesn't know anything about you beyond fragments, you say finally, quietly, wiping your face with the back of your hand. If you want to be part of her life even a little, you don't get to ask me to build that bridge. You show up. You tell her the truth, all of it, in a way a 16-year-old can actually hold, and you let her decide, in her own time, what happens after that. Will you let me try? He asks, and his voice is so small, so unlike the quiet, invisible man who spent 6 months emptying your trash can, rather than saying a single word. That something in you, not forgiveness, but recognition, maybe, of the frightened man underneath the shame, cracks open despite yourself. I'll bring her here, you say. Saturday morning. You tell her yourself in your own words. What she does with it after that is hers to decide. Not yours, not mine. That Saturday you sit at the far end of your office while Roscoe, no longer simply Fenwick, the name finally, restored after 20 years of hiding, inside a stranger's rhythm, sits across from Verity and tells her gently, in pieces small enough for a 16-year-old heart to hold, the truth about the job he lost in this very building, the shame that swallowed 2 decades, and the 6 months he spent cleaning your office just to feel close to a life he'd given up the right to enter directly. You watch Verity's face move through confusion, disbelief, something that isn't quite anger and isn't quite forgiveness, and finally, slowly, something that looks almost like curiosity, the particular grace only a child not yet, worn down by decades of grief, can offer a stranger who turns out to be family. You cleaned Dad's office for 6 months, she says finally, working through it out loud the way teenagers do, blunt and searching at once. Just because you were too scared to knock on the door? Yes, Roscoe says, no dressing it up, no softening it further. That's exactly it. I was a man hiding behind a trash bag, Verity. I should have just knocked. That's a really sad way to say hello, she says. And despite everything, despite 20 years of grief and 6 months of silent proximity, and something in your chest loosens slightly at the sound of your daughter naming, so simply, the exact shape of the wound her grandfather had spent 2 decades unable to name himself. 3 months later, on a cold January evening, you find yourself staying late again, the building mostly emptied out, and Roscoe knocks on your office door. An actual knock now. No longer a silent entrance with a trash bag, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one black and strong exactly, the way you remember him drinking it at the kitchen table decades ago. Old habit, he says, setting one down in front of you. Never could stop making 2 cups, even after I stopped having anyone to give the second one to. You've started the slow work of rebuilding, supervised dinners once a week that are becoming week by week, something closer to ordinary time together. A hallway of forgiveness. You're both still walking down, neither of you rushing toward its end. He's stepped down from the janitorial staff, taking instead a small consulting role on the factory floor, training the younger machinists on presses that have mostly been automated, but still require, occasionally, a hand that remembers what the machines forgot. You keep, now, a small object on your credenzo, Beside the old photograph of you and your late mother, a single work glove, thick-knuckled and machinist-worn, that Roscoe gave you the week after the truth came out. The only physical thing he kept from his 20 years of hiding. A reminder, he told you, that some men carry shame long enough to forget they were ever allowed to simply say hello. You don't know some nights whether you'll ever fully close the distance those 20 years carved into you. But you know this. The son who once believed his father died, broke and ashamed somewhere unreachable, now has a father who knocks on his office door, in person every week, and some quiet, healing part of you has started to believe that the people who feel most impossibly lost are sometimes only one trash bag, one late night, one properly lifted gaze away from finding their way back to who they used to be. If you'd let someone back into your life after a truth this hard to hear, tell me in the comments below. And if this story reached you, subscribe for next week, when we tell the story of a single mother mocked for wearing the same coat to work every winter, and the coworker who finally found out why.